Hala, for the invitation and the welcome. And yeah, so I'm really excited to be here and to give you an overview of how artists are thinking about AI and also using this technology. So yeah, in my presentation, I will focus on the most interesting projects I found in the past kind of 3.5 years. And I will kick off with Deep Dream. And I always like to ask at the beginning of my talks, how many people are familiar with this type of imagery? Yes, lots of hands up in the air. This is very good. Because it is like 3.5 years ago now, so if you're new to the field, maybe you hadn't seen it before. But yeah, for those of you who might not know so much about it, it is Deep Dream. It came out of a lab at Google in the US around 3.5 years ago, and it basically works like this. Let me just play. So this is Memo. He's a very good artist, frequently using AI, and you can also run him through this Deep Dream algorithm. Yes, you can see you have Memo, and then all these like pagodas and crazy colors come out of it. And yeah, so Memo has been experimenting a little with this technology. And then, of course, Mike Tyka, who is one of the co-authors of these algorithms. And then artists such as Daniel Ambrosi, who is a photographer, and he combined computational photography with Deep Dream techniques to create lots of images that are kind of somewhat realistic, but you can see kind of the spirals and the wacky colors from Deep Dream. And what followed was style transfer, which enabled you to turn your photo of a city into something that looked a little bit like Edvard Munch or Monet. And it was popularized by the app Prisma a couple of summers ago, where you could kind of do the same very quickly on mobile with lots of photos. And so I do quite a lot of work with the technical research community, and they're still extremely excited about style transfer. And they try to kind of put various cats through the algorithm, or kind of continue refining the techniques. And I always feel whenever I kind of show this to the art community, they always find it kind of, well, maybe interesting ones, but ultimately this is maybe not so much what contemporary art is about, right? Because it's such a broad field now. It's not so much about creating something that looks kind of very painterly in aesthetic. But nevertheless, there are some projects that are interesting, and well, Gene Kogan kind of shows how you can change Mona Lisa into Cubist, Impressionist, and Pointillist styles. And he also broadens what you can consider as style, right? Because I think ultimately, if you use something like Google Maps or kind of astronomy as your idea of style, then I think that can create some very interesting images. And there's also Sophia Crespo, who's an artist kind of trying to look at how you can create a neural zoo of various creatures. And yeah, I think she's been looking at kind of animals as animals and weird creatures as style points, and minimizing the content to see what kind of images she gets. And then moving on, there was a project from Terry Broad called Autoencoding Blade Runner. And this came out again probably about 2.5 years ago. And what Terry did was he developed an autoencoder algorithm and trained it on the film Blade Runner. Yeah, this is kind of how it works. And on the right, you see the generated footage. And yeah, I guess to me as a viewer, it is still quite blurry in places. And yeah, and I probably wouldn't watch it as a if I did want to see the film Blade Runner. But of course, it is a very interesting project if you want to look at how the machine is able to reconstruct a film frame by frame and see how it understands various parts of an image. But as sometimes happens in this field, Terry received some copyright infringement notices from, I think, one of the networks when he tried to upload this his project onto Vimeo and YouTube. And so ultimately we have this Blade Runner film that was reconstructed by a machine, and then it was judged by one of the machines or algorithms at Vimeo and Google that it's, too much of a kind of bootleg style, or it looks like it could have been filmed in a, I don't know, in a cinema somewhere. So I think it is, quite interesting that kind of this came about, and it does raise kind of a valid point in terms of how artists and creatives should be aware of kind of the data and the algorithms and the tools they're using, and maybe more on that later. And then came the GAN, so the Generative Adversarial Networks. And it feels to me that everybody's still very much obsessed with them. And so they've been around since, I think, 2014. And there were a couple of, I think, the Pix2Pix implementation became very popular probably about a couple of years ago. And various artists have been, playing around with these tools, one of whom is, of course, Mario Klingemann, who will be giving a talk later today about his work. So I'm not going to say too much about this, but I certainly feel that he's one of the pioneers of this AI art field, and I'm very impressed in how he is kind of always able to play around with the latest models that come out and try to see how he can combine techniques and represent the human form and faces. And I was also very pleased when this work, so The Butcher's Son, it won the Lumen Prize for Digital Art earlier this year. So it was a nice recognition from a segment of the art world that this type of work is important. So yeah, these are some of Mario's figure representations, and these are some of his self-portraits, which I hope he will tell you more about in his talk. And now I'd like to tell you about a few artists who think more about the data component in their work. So one of these is Roman Lipski, who I think is one of the first artists trying to think about how you can apply these techniques to work that you kind of painted yourself. So what he did is he took a photograph of a Los Angeles night scene, and then he made 9 kind of paintings out of it. And normally what Roman Lipski does is he's a landscape painter, so this is kind of somewhat typical of his style. And then he trained a convolutional neural network to get some images like this out of it. So you can see kind of the composition is maybe a little bit confused, also the colors. So it is like a bit different maybe to what you expect, and that's probably partly due to the very small data set of 9 images. And then what Roman Lipski did is he made 12 paintings inspired by those images he saw. So you can see there's a bit of a kind of probably deviation from the original 9 paintings you saw in terms of kind of composition and color use. And then he fed these back into a machine to get images like this. And again, he responded in his own artistic practice and painted another work that looks like this. So to me, this is a very interesting example of how an artist from a fine art tradition can kind of think and interact with these tools in a manner that is more kind of natural and natural. So he still stayed within the painting medium. And I think now when he exhibits, sometimes he just exhibits his paintings. Maybe occasionally he will also kind of show some of the prints, but he's still very much a painter in the fine art movement. And he was able to use this technology to reevaluate his style and to kind of maybe get out of a creative rut and figure out what can he do differently by kind of being able to see what the machine understands and values and is able to create out of his paintings. And then another artist is Anna Ridler, who watched this film called Fall of the House of Usher, which was made in 1928 based on an Edgar Allan Poe short story. And after watching this film, she made 200 or 300 ink paintings like this. And then she used Pix2Pix to generate kind of more images in her style, which she then made into an animation, which you can see here. And I think, so Anna has made, I think, a couple of versions of this project now, because of course the technology keeps improving and so on. And this is one of the earlier ones. And it is quite blurry in places. And that is partly because, I guess, Anna is a human. And to make 200 ink drawing is already a lot. But the film is, I guess, 16 minutes long, and by creating this limited data set of 200 drawings, certain parts of the film had kind of more drawings that the machine could learn from, and others had less. So this kind of also shows how the generated image might be better or more precisely generated in certain places and less in others. And I certainly know from talking to Anna that she found it quite insightful to also work with the algorithm, because she discovered certain new things about her style that, for example, she draws eyebrows and eyes in a similar fashion, and that, at certain points she maybe forgot to include a background element like the chair. And all of these maybe little mistakes or stylistic tendencies of hers, they were all incorporated in this final animation generated by machine. And there's a work by Yegor Kraft, an artist from Russia, called Content Aware Studies. And Yegor was interested in kind of looking at how these new technologies can be used to reconstruct some of the classical old sculptures from late antiquity. This is a very new project, and I was actually trying to find the best images for it, and I think these might be some of the better examples to show you. But so he found, he made some sculptures and also generated images to see what these sculptures can look like, or what the machine can kind of reconstruct and complete from what is missing. And yes, he generated lots of different versions, and you can see some of them are probably more plausible than others. And he then also made some completed kind of sculptures where you can probably see the original face, and he kind of completed the other part of the face, though bizarrely not the nose, which I'm quite curious about. But yeah, this is an example of how you can, I guess, use this technology also to try and help recreate some of these sculptures that have kind of become a little bit worn, and see them in a new light from the contemporary machine perspective. Yeah, now I'd like to look at the work of Mimi Onuoha, who is an artist based in Brooklyn, and she was always kind of interested in also thinking about data and what is present and also what is missing. And she made this project called the Library of Missing Datasets. And it's like a cabinet that you might find in an office, and you open one of the drawers, and you can see that it's got lots of folders with names of data that you might kind of want or expect, such as accurate birth registration, probably of some group, number of Americans without bank account. And when you look through them, you would find that there was nothing. So there was no data set on a lot of these topics, which often concerned niche or underrepresented communities, because kind of those communities might not have had the power to create a data set and make it available. And of course, the larger corporate structures were maybe less interested in that. So she wanted to highlight that through her work. And yeah, so this project is about 2 years old now, and I know from speaking with Mimi that the situation has improved, so some of these are now available. So it's always good to see how an artist can kind of spur on others to think and improve the kind of the data that is available. And Caroline Sinders is looking at how you can make data collection into an artwork yourself. So she's been running a few workshops on the feminist data set, and there she invited groups of people to look at how you can kind of create new data that represents female concepts and feminist concepts, and so on. Meanwhile, Sebastian Schmieg showcases how difficult it can be for us humans to classify images. And he had a project outside the Photographers Gallery in London, where and online, where visitors were invited to look through photographs made by Cindy Sherman or Trevor Paglen, so kind of famous names, and they had to classify them into either the problem or solution, or the past or the future. And these are some of the images that came out as the problem. So people wearing stripy tops, nuclear power stations, and solutions became Arts Council England, which funds a lot of artistic work. Parrot, and in terms of the past, you had sofas, you had cameras, and the future became people with guns, children, eclipses. So yeah, so I think here you can see that it is quite difficult to categorize those images into categories which are quite abstract, and kind of it highlights that if we as humans have trouble with that, then what about machines? The Tate in the UK had an IK prize on digital innovation that was themed around AI and how you can make the British collection of digital art more accessible to kind of people around the world. And it was won by Fabrica, an Italian studio, with the project called Recognition, which matched contemporary photojournalism, like images over there, to art from the British collection at the Tate, like this one, using kind of a combination of various, I think, object recognition, context analysis, and such other tools. And there were some cool images that it did match. So the Mercedes-Benz car seats were matched with a Henry Moore sculpture, and people kind of sitting behind a computer, maybe on Facebook, maybe not, were matched to scholars from the past. I think this is like a fun way of opening up and linking the collection to some of the more contemporary themes. And there's a work by Scott Kelly and Ben Polkinghorne called Signs of Our Times that, kind of looks at probably at our reliance on recommendation systems and our obsession with devices. So if you go to a beautiful national park in New Zealand, you might come across this sign which suggests you to go to other beautiful national parks, because obviously that's what you might want to do when you're at a national park. And the same happens when you're at the seaside, or when you want to go up on a slide. And I particularly like the fact that this blocks the slide, so this kind of highlights that, obviously these recommendation signs and using technology diminishes the enjoyment of the broader experience. And next project is by Harm van den Dorpel. And I really like his work and aesthetic, because he's been playing with genetic algorithms. And I know they were popular at some point in time, but I feel nowadays everybody is obsessed with various semi-realistic generative models, such as GANs. So projects like this seem to get less attention. But yeah, we have to include Harm's work. And what he did for this project, which I think is called Hybrid Vigor, is he made a series of turtle drawings with a custom genetic algorithm. And basically what happened, he had two images, kind of like parents, and then they generated lots of possible images. And then the user could pick a couple of these to then generate more possible images, and the process kind of continued until the two images were very similar. And at that point, one image was kept back and became printed as an artwork. So he has some very beautiful prints. And yeah, here are kind of some images from his. Yeah, now I'll talk about Nicolas Magret and Marie Roskowska, or Disnovation. And I think they're actually based in Paris. So I probably should have brought them along to this conference, but I will include them in the slide. And they did a project called Predictive Art Bot, which was a Twitter bot that looked at news media and generated concepts for artworks, such as a feminist land art piece divulging classified information about online dating, or these various other options, like a robotic fridge collecting oddities about globalization. And I guess what I found cool about this project is that when they showed it at Transmediale, which is one of the most important media academic art festivals, is they issued a call for artists who would then execute these concepts that were generated by the machine. And I remember there was kind of some video work that was shown alongside this project. And so this project also kind of highlights how you can use some of these tools to help you come up with ideas, because ultimately, if you've been to enough contemporary art exhibitions, you will realize that all of these are perfectly kind of valid as potential artwork concepts. And then I also like that it kind of subverted the traditional idea where it's kind of the human that tells the machine what to do. It kind of almost became the other way around, because artists were given these machine-generated concepts and they had to kind of execute or make them happen. And this is a little bit similar with the work done by Coralie Vogelaar, who did some recent work with emotion recognition software, where I think she mapped the different possible emotions and then the typical kind of movements associated with each emotion. And then she got an algorithm to generate kind of, I think, semi-random strings of movements. And this poor actress had to actually try and make these movements kind of happen, and then they were also kind of analyzed by the machine. Then there's a project by Julien Dessuef and Matt Plummer-Fernandez called Thingiverse. And Thingiverse is a 3D printing community where you can upload your 3D print designs. And they created a bot that created mashups of various designs, such as this example, which is called an open overlord nozzle, and it combined a couple of designs to create this object, which is, maybe not so practical, or maybe not so practical if that's what you're looking for. But what I find interesting here is the feedback from the community. So what happened with this bot was that it kept posting all the latest mashups on this Thingiverse platform, and artists who were creating the work themselves and uploading their designs, they got less visibility. So the various discussions around that. So some people were wondering if it's spam, or maybe it's kind of a genuine way for somebody to try and communicate. Others are not happy that the work was not becoming so visible because the bot hijacked the front page. And then yet others were just happy that the work was included. So to me, this kind of also shows what might happen in the future, when we might all be generating a lot more kind of designs and artworks, and what the social reception might be. And ultimately, this project was 3D printed and exhibited in the Netherlands, and people could vote whether they consider it art or spam. And art got quite a lot of votes, but hey, it was shown in an art gallery, so maybe some bias. And now moving on to some more critical artworks, and I'll include this project by Lauren McCarthy called Lauren, where she decided that she will play the role of Alexa or of Google Home. So so she found some volunteers who let her do things such as control the temperature or turn the music on and off in their home. So fulfill some of these basic kind of tasks that some of us might now outsource to our assistants. And for her, this was kind of an interesting way of looking at how maybe some of the female roles or tasks are kind of changing or being displaced with these kind of assistants that invade the space of the home and maybe take over some of the functions that the people in my home can overtake. So yeah, she was also kind of acting as this surveillance person, and kind of changing the lives of the people who volunteered to participate. And carrying on with the theme of surveillance, I like to include this project by Constant Dullard, which works pretty much an opposite to Deep Dream. So while Deep Dream emphasizes the features, Dull Dream reduces them. So you get a blurry image of a protest or a blurry image of Trump. And it's also a website called dulldream.xyz, and it enables you can upload a photo there, and you'll also get a version back where your face is reduced and kind of, it's probably less recognizable by some of these facial recognition and surveillance systems. So it's kind of an artistic act. And Adam Harvey has also looked at ways how you can make your face less detectable as a face by facial recognition systems. And he did this work called CV Dazzle, where if you put two kind of triangles on your face, there would be no face detected. But if you only kept one triangle, it would still recognize it as a face. And the same with various kind of crazy hairstyles that block your face. And so these couple of examples are, I think, dated, maybe 2 years ago now. And I have a feeling that computer vision algorithms have kind of maybe already surpassed and are able to detect faces there, which also kind of shows how some of this technology evolves very quickly. But kind of dealing with facial recognition is still very much a topic that is ongoing. And Adam Harvey has also made this project called Hyperface, I think around a year ago, where I think it's some sort of mask that blends in the surroundings with your face and lets you escape facial recognition that way. And there's also an artistic project by the Korean artists Shin Sung-bak, Kim Young-hung, that invited painters to make portraits in collaboration with a facial recognition algorithm. And so these portraits, they were supposed to not be recognized as faces. So you can see that these are some of the examples that were ultimately not recognized as faces. And Tom White wanted to do kind of the opposite. So he wanted to create some images that would always be recognized as a particular category by the algorithm. So I think this was like a starfish, and this is maybe cabbage. And yeah, I think I'm nearing the end of my talk, which means I can put this slide up, because I feel nobody's quite sure what to do with these guys. And I'm also not sure where on earth to incorporate them in my presentation, because ultimately there is no artistic value in this project. But it kind of sold for like 430,000 US dollars, which is a lot of money. And yeah, so this portrait of Edmond de Bellamy was made by a Paris-based collective called Obvious. And I always perceive them as a kind of as a marketing agency. So what they did was they trained an algorithm, an implementation made by Robbie Barrett on some kind of images of old paintings. And yeah, if you kind of compare that with some of the work I showed earlier of Mario Klingemann, you will probably see that there was not much kind of technical skill involved. And then they kind of printed it and they signed it with some formula and put it in a gold frame. And so, hey, this is now kind of sellable. And yeah, and I think this came as a bit of a shock to a lot of people in the AI art community, because yeah, the quality is not great, and Christie's chose that as the AI art piece to sell. But hey, the art world is crazy, so it did fetch a lot of money, and I'd be curious to see how that kind of affects future sales and so on. But I certainly hope that in terms of future artistic production and the work that is made by you guys and others in the community, that you will kind of continue thinking about making work that is interesting in terms of concept or kind of the data set or the technique you use, and it's not just kind of a stunt or an effort to be the first person who is using AI in some kind of very, very niche field without kind of much thought or intent. And yeah, you can see some more projects on the NIPS for Creativity website, which is an art gallery I made this time last year for the NIPS workshop on machine learning for creativity and design. And there will be another gallery of this year's projects live in the next couple of weeks. And at this point, I will end. So if you need to contact me, here are my contact details. And you can also ask questions for a few minutes now, I believe.